When an avoidant says, I need space, most people panic. They think it means, I'm losing them. But space isn't always about distance. And it's not always about you. Sometimes, when an avoidant asks for space, what they're really saying is, I don't know how to handle how close this feels. Because what looks like withdrawal is often nervous system overload. And the mistake most people make is giving more of the wrong thing, more reassurance, more intensity, more emotion, when what they actually need is something completely different. Let's break the illusion first. When an avoidant asks for space, it feels personal. It feels like rejection. It feels like punishment. It feels like emotional abandonment. But for someone wired with avoidant attachment, space is regulation, not rejection. Avoidants don't withdraw because they feel nothing. They withdraw because they feel too much and don't know how to metabolize it. Closeness activates something in them, not romance, not excitement, exposure. When connection deepens, their nervous system interprets it as pressure, not because you're demanding, but because intimacy reduces distance. And distance is where they feel safe. Distance gives them autonomy. Distance gives them control. Distance gives them room to self-contain. But closeness? Closeness creates interdependence. And interdependence feels like vulnerability. So when they say, I need space, what they're often responding to is internal escalation. The bond is becoming real. Your presence is starting to matter. Your absence would hurt. And that realization creates stakes. Stakes create fear. Fear activates withdrawal. Now here's the part most people misunderstand. If you respond to I need space with, okay, take all the time you need, but internally you are anxious, waiting, monitoring, resenting, they feel that too. Because space isn't only physical, it's energetic. If your nervous system is still reaching, they still feel pressure. What avoidants actually need isn't silence. It isn't punishment. It isn't being ignored. It's de-escalation. They need emotional intensity lowered. They need closeness. That doesn't feel consuming. They need reassurance. That autonomy still exists. Not verbally. Regulation ally. Because avoidants are hypersensitive to engulfment. Engulfment doesn't mean you're controlling. It means they fear losing themselves inside someone else. That fear usually formed early. Maybe emotional needs weren't welcomed. Maybe vulnerability felt unsafe. Maybe they learned that dependency equals weakness. So they built a system. Stay self-reliant. Stay composed. Stay detached enough to survive. But here's the paradox. They still crave connection. They still want intimacy. They still want to feel chosen. They just don't want to feel overwhelmed. And when intimacy accelerates faster than their tolerance, they hit the brakes. I need space. But what they often need is safety within closeness, not absence, not abandonment. Safety that says, you can come close without losing yourself. And most partners accidentally communicate the opposite. When space is requested, anxious partners intensify. Secure-leaning partners may get confused, but stay grounded. Reactive partners withdraw in retaliation. All three can reinforce the avoidant fear. Because what the avoidant nervous system is scanning for is, am I still free? Am I still autonomous? Am I being emotionally cornered? And here's something subtle. The more emotionally important you become, the more space they may ask for. Not because you're failing, because you matter. Significance raises emotional temperature, and they regulate temperature with distance. Now here's where most dynamics collapse. The partner interprets space as lack of care. They push for clarity. They push for reassurance. They push for definition. and the avoidant feels pursued. Pursuit feels like pressure. Pressure confirms the need for more space, and the cycle tightens. But what actually interrupts it is counterintuitive. It's steady presence without pursuit. It's emotional calm without withdrawal. It's maintaining your life without dramatizing theirs. It's not collapsing, and it's not chasing. It's remaining regulated. Because when you stay regulated, you remove escalation. And when escalation drops, their nervous system has a chance to settle without needing full emotional shutdown. Now let's go deeper. Avoidants don't need space to feel less. They need space to feel safely. That's the distinction. They need to process attachment activation without external demand. They need closeness to feel optional, not consuming. They need to experience intimacy as something that enhances autonomy, not erases it. And that takes time. But here's the truth. Most people don't want to hear. You cannot regulate someone who refuses to self-reflect. You can only regulate yourself. If someone repeatedly asks for space, every time connection deepens, and never develops capacity, that's not a phase. That's a pattern. Space becomes avoidance. When it replaces communication, it becomes emotional distance. When it's never followed by return, healthy space is temporary. Avoidant space becomes indefinite. When vulnerability feels intolerable. So what do they actually need? They need emotional pacing, autonomy respected without emotional disappearance, closeness that builds gradually, consistency without control, and most importantly, they need internal capacity for intimacy, which you cannot build for them. You can only see whether it's developing. And here's the critical shift. When you stop hearing, "I need space" as rejection, and start hearing it as regulation, you respond differently. Not with panic, not with pursuit, not with cold detachment, but with grounded clarity. You give space, but you don't shrink. You step back, but you don't beg. You allow breathing room, but you maintain standards. Because someone who truly wants connection will return to it, not indefinitely orbit outside it. And that's the real line. Avoidants don't need endless space. They need emotional safety. That doesn't feel like engulfment. And if they can't tolerate that safety, no amount of distance will fix it. It will only delay the next withdrawal. Which means the real question isn't, why does he need space? It's, does he have the capacity to come back closer? And that is where this becomes about discernment. Not decoding, not fixing. Discernment. When an avoidant asks for space, most partners go into one of two extremes. They either chase or they detach completely. Both feel logical. Both feel protective. Both usually backfire. Chasing feels natural because connection feels threatened. You want reassurance, clarity, stability. So you reach. You check in. You try to keep it warm. But to an avoidant nervous system, that reads as escalation. Even if your tone is calm, even if your message is kind, even if your intention is pure, it still feels like pressure. Because what they are trying to regulate is internal intensity, and your emotional presence, when they're dysregulated, amplifies it. So they pull further. Now the other extreme. Cold detachment. Silence as strategy. Emotional shutdown as protection. You think, if they want space, I'll disappear. But here's the subtle problem. Disappearance confirms abandonment, and abandonment activates a different fear. Not engulfment, loss. Avoidance suppress dependency, but they are not immune to it. If you vanish in a way that feels punitive, they don't feel safe. They feel destabilized. And destabilized avoidants don't lean in. They shut down. So what actually works? Regulated distance. Distance without drama. space without emotional punishment, a nervous system that says, I am okay, and you are free. Because what an avoidant is scanning for in space is threat reduction. They want to know, am I being cornered? Am I being emotionally chased? Am I being guilt? Am I losing autonomy? If the answer becomes no, their body relaxes. And when their body relaxes, curiosity returns. Not because you manipulated them, but because the perceived threat dissolved. This is where most people get confused. They think, if I don't pursue, they'll forget me. But avoidants don't forget calm. They don't forget steadiness. They don't forget someone who didn't escalate. Because regulated people feel rare, and rare creates imprint. Now let's go deeper. During space, avoidants often experience two internal movements: relief and evaluation. Relief comes first. The emotional pressure drops. The intensity quiets. They can breathe again. And in that breathing room, their mind starts sorting. What was I feeling? Was that overwhelming? Was it too fast? Was I losing control? But here's the key. If you stayed grounded, if you didn't react explosively, if you didn't flood them with emotion, they cannot justify you as the problem. And when they can't externalize blame, they're left with internal reflection. That's powerful, because avoidants are comfortable avoiding others. They are less comfortable avoiding themselves. When there's no conflict to point at, your calm forces self-confrontation, not aggressively, quietly. They start noticing something. You weren't controlling. You weren't chaotic. You weren't demanding. You were steady. So what exactly felt threatening? That question lingers. And lingering questions create growth opportunities. Now here's where the dynamic can pivot. If they return, and you collapse back into overavailability, nothing changes. If they return, and you punish them emotionally, nothing changes. If they return, and you pretend nothing happened, nothing changes. The shift only happens when closeness is reintroduced at a sustainable pace. Because avoidants don't need infinite space. They need pacing. They need intimacy that unfolds, not overwhelms. They need autonomy preserved, inside connection. And that requires boundaries, not walls. Boundaries. Walls shut people out. Boundaries protect while allowing access. So when they come back, you don't interrogate. You don't cling. You don't overcompensate. You stay consistent, warm, but independent, engaged, but not engulfing, present, but not consuming. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Some avoidance will only come back to restore comfort, not to expand capacity. They miss the steadiness. They miss the emotional safety, but they still resist vulnerability. That's when the pattern repeats. Space, return, closeness, retreat. And if that cycle happens repeatedly, it's no longer about regulation. It's about limitation. Which brings us to the real shift. You stop asking, how do I stop them from needing space? And start asking, can they tolerate intimacy without escaping it? That's discernment. Because space itself isn't the enemy. Unresolved avoidance is. Healthy space has a rhythm: withdrawal, regulation, return, re-engagement, growth. Avoidance space without growth looks different. Withdrawal, silence, surface return, same trigger, repeat, and you can feel the difference. Your body knows. In healthy space, you don't feel abandoned. You feel temporarily distanced. In avoidant shutdown, you feel erased. And that distinction matters, because what they actually need isn't isolation. It's the ability to stay emotionally present without feeling consumed. But that skill must be developed internally. You cannot donate it. You cannot model it into them fast enough. You can only decide if you are willing to walk alongside their growth pace. Now here's something empowering. When you stop panicking during space, your power returns. You stop overfunctioning. You stop micromanaging the emotional climate. You stop trying to anticipate their retreat. You allow behavior to reveal capacity. And that is stabilizing, not just for them, for you. Because when you are no longer reacting to space, you become grounded. And grounded people don't chase inconsistency, they observe it. And observation changes everything. It shifts you from anxious interpretation to clear evaluation. And that is where you regain control, not over them, over yourself, which ironically makes you feel safer too. Because here's the deeper truth. Avoidants don't just need space. They need to feel that closeness does not equal loss of self. And if they cannot learn that, space will always be their reflex, not their solution. So the real transformation in this dynamic doesn't start with them asking for less space. It starts with you no longer fearing it. Because when you stop fearing it, you stop amplifying it. And when you stop amplifying it, their nervous system doesn't have to defend as hard. That's when you see who they actually are, someone growing or someone repeating. And that clarity is more valuable than any reassurance. Here's what nobody says. If you are constantly bracing for when they'll ask for space again, you're not in connection, you're in anticipation. And anticipation is anxiety, not love. When an avoidant asks for space, the real question isn't, how do I make this work? It's, does this dynamic feel safe for me? Because here's the twist. You can understand avoidance deeply. You can regulate perfectly. You can give space beautifully and still feel emotionally alone. Understanding someone does not automatically make them capable. That's a hard truth. Avoidants don't just fear losing you. They fear needing you. Needing feels like weakness. Dependency feels like danger. So when closeness grows, their nervous system whispers, this is risky, and space becomes the exit. Not because you did something wrong, but because intimacy crossed their tolerance window. Now here's the subtle shift. When you stop trying to reduce their need for space and start increasing your own standards, the power dynamic changes. You stop shrinking to fit their comfort. You stop overadjusting. You stop proving you're low maintenance. Because here's the reality. If connection only works when you minimize yourself, that's not balance. That's self-abandonment. Let's break something down clearly. Healthy space sounds like, I need a day to clear my head. Let's talk tomorrow. Avoidant shutdown sounds like silence, distance, emotional disappearance, then casual return like nothing happened. Those are not the same thing. One is regulation, the other is avoidance. And your body knows the difference. Watch this carefully. When you remain calm during space, one of two things happens. They lean back in with more openness, or they lean back in with the same pattern. That's your data, not their words. Their pattern. Patterns don't lie. If they return softer, more reflective, more willing to talk, growth is happening. Slowly, but genuinely. If they return defensive, blaming, or acting like you're too much for wanting closeness, the cycle is intact. And cycles don't fix themselves. Here's another truth. You cannot love someone into emotional capacity. You cannot be patient enough to build their nervous system for them. You can inspire safety. You can model regulation. But they must choose expansion. And not all avoidants choose it. Sometimes space is growth. Sometimes space is a slow fade. The difference? Intention. Is space used to reflect or to escape? Is it followed by accountability or by deflection? That's the line. And now the uncomfortable mirror. Why does their distance feel so destabilizing to you? Is it because you love them? Or because inconsistency activates your own fear? This is where attachment meets attachment. Avoidant fear meets anxious fear, and both feel like survival. But healing starts when one person stops reacting, not to punish, not to manipulate, but to stabilize. When you no longer panic during space, you communicate something powerful. I am steady. Steadiness is unfamiliar to many avoidants. It's disarming. It removes drama. It removes the excuse. It removes the narrative. That closeness equals chaos. And that's when their internal conflict sharpens. Because if you are calm and they still feel the urge to run, they have to face that the trigger is internal, not external. That's confronting. But here's your empowerment. If they keep running, even when you're regulated, that's not a compatibility problem. That's a capacity problem. And you are not required to shrink your needs, to match someone's ceiling. Let that land. You can give space without disappearing. You can stay warm without chasing. You can love deeply without abandoning yourself. That balance, that's strength. And strength changes dynamics, not by force, by clarity. So when they ask for space again, don't react. Observe. Do they grow? Or do they repeat? That answer will tell you everything. Here's the part most people avoid. You don't actually fear their need for space. You fear what the space reveals. Because space exposes reality. No reassurance. No constant contact. No emotional noise. Just pattern. And pattern tells the truth. If they use space to regulate and return stronger, you feel it. The conversations deepen. The defensiveness softens. The vulnerability stretches slightly further. That's effort. That's growth. Slow, but real. But if they use space to reset comfort without expanding capacity, you feel that too. Same triggers, same withdrawal, same emotional ceiling. Different week, same cycle. And cycles feel familiar. Familiar is not the same as healthy. Here's the shift. You stop asking, how do I keep them from pulling away? And start asking, do I feel chosen when things get real? Because that's the real question. Anyone can stay when it's light. Anyone can feel close when it's easy. But when intimacy deepens, when emotions get exposed, when attachment activates, do they lean in or do they leave? That's your answer. Avoidants don't ask for space because they don't care. They ask for space because closeness feels destabilizing. But here's the truth that matters. Love requires emotional risk. If someone constantly retreats from risk, they are not rejecting you. They are rejecting vulnerability. And vulnerability is required for intimacy. Without it, you don't have depth. You have proximity. There's a difference. You cannot build intimacy alone. You cannot carry emotional weight for two. You cannot regulate someone who refuses self-awareness. And you cannot prove safety to someone committed to distance. That's not your job. Your job is simpler. Stay regulated. Stay clear. Stay honest about your needs. And watch behavior, not promises, not potential. Behavior. Because behavior reveals capacity. And capacity determines compatibility. If your calm invites growth, stay. If your calm exposes avoidance, decide. But don't distort reality. To protect hope, hope without evidence, becomes self-abandonment. Here's the empowering truth. When you stop fearing their space, you reclaim yours. You stop overfunctioning. You stop proving. You stop negotiating your emotional depth. And suddenly, the dynamic shifts. Because now, they are not the only one deciding the distance. You are. That's power, not control. power. And here's the question I want you to sit with. If nothing about their pattern changed in the next year, would you still feel safe? Would you still feel secure? Would you still feel chosen? Answer that honestly, not romantically, honestly, because clarity protects you. If this resonated, don't just like the video. Reflect. Are you giving space from strength or from fear of losing them? Drop one word in the comments. Growth or cycle. Be honest with yourself. And if you're ready to understand avoidant dynamics at a deeper psychological level, not from blame, but from clarity, subscribe. Because the more you understand the pattern, the less it controls you. And the next time they ask for space, you won't panic. You'll evaluate. That shift changes everything.